FBI agent vanished in 1989. 5 years later, investigators find this in a storage unit. In the bustling heart of Chicago, where the winds sweeping off Lake Michigan carried whispers of ambition and intrigue, Special Agent Thomas Riley was a man whose presence commanded respect. Known for his methodical approach and an uncanny ability to dissect the most convoluted cases, Riley was on the precipice of dismantling a powerful syndicate believed to be operating within the city's highest echelons. It was the autumn of 1989, a time when the world was on the brink of profound change. Yet for Riley, the focus remained squarely on the dark underbelly of his adopted city. He had been working tirelessly, often sacrificing sleep and personal life, driven by an unwavering commitment to justice. His targets were elusive, their connections far-reaching, but Riley felt he was closer than ever to exposing their entire operation. Then, one crisp October evening, after an urgent, hushed phone call, Agent Riley simply vanished. He was last seen leaving the FBI field office, his trench coat pulled tight against the evening chill, a briefcase clutched in one hand. The initial search was immediate and exhaustive, encompassing every alley, every shadowy corner of Chicago, extending even to the quiet suburbs. His colleagues, friends, and family held on to a desperate hope, but as days bled into weeks and weeks into months, the hope dwindled, replaced by a chilling silence that swallowed the very air he once breathed. The case quickly turned cold, a grim testament to the syndicate's power, leaving behind only questions and an aching void in the lives of those who knew him. Watch until the very end to uncover the full, astonishing truth, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? For 5 agonizing years, the disappearance of Agent Thomas Riley remained an unsolved mystery, a chilling footnote in the annals of the FBI. His file, once thick with active leads and promising breakthroughs, lay dormant, gathering dust in the archives, occasionally revisited by a new generation of agents who, despite their best efforts, found themselves hitting the same impenetrable wall of silence. The city of Chicago, ever moving forward, seemed to have swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of his existence. Yet fate, in its unpredictable wisdom, often chooses the most unlikely instruments to reveal long-buried secrets. It was a frigid morning in early December of 1994, the kind of morning that bites at exposed skin and urges one indoors, when a chance encounter at a dilapidated storage facility on the city's industrial fringe would irrevocably alter the course of this cold case. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, a man whose life had been reduced to the margins, sought refuge from the biting wind in an abandoned storage unit, a common practice for those with nowhere else to go. The unit, long forgotten and left unlocked, offered a temporary sanctuary. As he pushed aside the heavy rusting door, a blast of stale air and the faint scent of mildew greeted him. He scanned the dimly lit space, his eyes adjusting to the gloom, expecting to find nothing more than discarded junk and cobwebs. Instead, nestled amongst the shadows, his foot nudged against something solid, something that felt strangely familiar, yet utterly out of place in such a desolate setting. He bent down, his fingers fumbling in the darkness, and his hand closed around a cold, metallic object. When he held it up to the sliver of light filtering through the grimy window, a gasp escaped his lips. It was a tarnished, yet unmistakably authentic FBI badge, engraved with a name that sent a shiver down his spine: Thomas Riley. Beside it, partially obscured by a thick layer of dust, lay a worn leather briefcase and a pair of broken handcuffs, suggesting a struggle that had occurred within those very walls years ago. And then, a silence that endured. The air in the neglected storage unit hung heavy with dust and the lingering scent of decay, a silent testament to the years that had passed since anyone had truly paid it mind. Arthur Jenkins, his worn hands still trembling from the shock of his discovery, clutched the cold, metallic badge as if it were a fragile bird. The name Thomas Riley, etched onto its surface, seemed to hum with an almost palpable energy, pulling him out of his own desolate reality and into a narrative far grander, far more sinister than anything he had ever imagined. His initial instinct was a blend of disbelief and fear, for a man in his position knew better than to meddle with things that belonged to the powerful. Yet, the badge, a symbol of authority and justice, stirred something within him. A faint flicker of civic duty, perhaps, or simply the desperate hope that this single find could, somehow, change his own fortunes. With a deep, shuddering breath, he carefully placed the badge, the briefcase, and the broken handcuffs into a tattered plastic bag he kept for scavenging, then made his way to the nearest payphone, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The call was placed to the Chicago Police Department, his voice raspy and uncertain as he relayed his extraordinary discovery. Officer Miller, on desk duty at the precinct that morning, a veteran of 2 decades accustomed to calls ranging from the mundane to the genuinely bizarre, took the report with a skeptical sigh. An FBI badge found by a homeless man in an abandoned storage unit? It sounded like a desperate fabrication, a plea for attention, or perhaps a hallucination fueled by desperation. Yet the details, as Arthur recounted them, had a strangely specific ring to truth to them. The exact address of the storage facility, the mention of broken handcuffs and a leather briefcase. Something in the man's earnest, almost fearful tone nudged Miller's ingrained skepticism. He made a mental note to send a patrol car to check it out, mostly to satisfy their protocol, not truly expecting to find anything of significance. Still, as he jotted down the address, the name Thomas Riley pricked at the edges of his memory, a ghost from an old cold case file he had once briefly glimpsed during his early days on the force, a case that had baffled even the most seasoned investigators. It was a name associated with an unsolved disappearance, a file marked with the chilling phrase, "presumed deceased." The coincidence, however remote, was enough to warrant a slightly more serious consideration than a typical nuisance call. He decided to elevate the dispatch, opting to send not just any patrol car, but to notify Detective Michael Ross, a man known for his tenacious pursuit of even the most elusive truths. He knew Ross, unlike many, possessed a unique blend of cynicism and an unwavering belief that every detail, no matter how small or unlikely, held the potential to unlock a larger narrative. This, Miller instinctively knew, was a case that required such a mind. The harsh metallic tang of the Chicago winter air bit at Michael Ross's exposed skin as he stepped out of his unmarked sedan. The address Officer Miller had given him led to a desolate stretch of industrial road, lined with decaying brick buildings and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The sky overhead was a uniform gray, mirroring the grim reality that often characterized his work. He'd spent 2 decades navigating the city's underbelly, witnessing its capacity for darkness, and very little surprised him anymore. Yet, the mention of Thomas Riley, a name from a forgotten era of his career, stirred a faint, unsettling unease deep within him. Riley's disappearance had been one of those cases that haunted the department. A ghost story whispered in hushed tones, a reminder of the unseen dangers that lurked even for those sworn to uphold the law. Ross pushed open the heavy gate to the storage facility, the rusty hinges groaning in protest, a sound that seemed to echo the weariness in his own bones. The patrol car was already there, its blue and red lights casting a faint, rhythmic glow against the corrugated metal walls of the storage units. 2 uniformed officers stood by unit number 7, their faces grim in the cold light. As Ross approached, their respectful nods acknowledged his arrival, but their silence spoke volumes. He could sense their apprehension, an unspoken understanding that this was no ordinary trespass call. The air inside the storage complex felt colder, heavier, almost as if the years of neglect had solidified into an oppressive presence. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light that pierced through cracks in the roof, creating an ethereal, almost spectral atmosphere. Unit number 7 stood out, its door slightly ajar, like an open wound in the side of the weathered structure. Ross pulled on a pair of latex gloves, a ritual ingrained into his very being, a silent preparation for the grim realities that so often awaited him. He pushed the door fully open, and the silence inside the unit was profound, broken only by the faint creak of the door swinging back on its hinges. The space was small, no larger than a modest bedroom, but its emptiness was unsettling, pregnant with an unspoken history. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old cardboard, metallic rust, and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible smell that Ross, with his years of experience, identified as the lingering ghost of fear and decay. His eyes, accustomed to seeking out the minute details others missed, swept across the concrete floor. The light that filtered in through the grimy window high on the wall was barely enough to illuminate the corners, creating pockets of deep shadow. There was no furniture, no boxes, nothing that would suggest a conventional use for the unit. It was remarkably clean for an abandoned space, almost as if someone had deliberately cleared it out, yet the dust on the floor was undisturbed, thick and even. His gaze landed on the far wall. There, scrawled in what appeared to be dried, dark pigment, were a series of symbols. They were crude, almost tribal in their design, unlike anything he had ever encountered in his years investigating crime scenes. A circle with a jagged line dissecting it, a series of interconnected triangles, a stylized eye. They felt ancient, unsettling, a stark contrast to the modern industrial setting. His mind, usually sharp and analytical, struggled to categorize them. Were they gang tags, a sick joke, or something far more esoteric and disturbing? In the center of the unit, standing alone like a forgotten sentinel, was an old, manual typewriter, its keys caked with dust, its ribbon long since dried and brittle. It seemed out of place, an anachronism in a forgotten room, yet its presence was undeniably deliberate. Ross knelt down, his gaze fixed on the symbols on the wall, a creeping sense of unease starting to coil in his gut. The silence stretched, amplifying the unspoken questions that began to flood his mind. What secrets did this desolate space hold? And how had Agent Riley, a man of logic and order, become entangled in a mystery so steeped in the bizarre? The silence in Unit Number 7 was not empty. It vibrated with a palpable tension, a profound stillness that spoke of long-held secrets and untold horrors. Detective Michael Ross, a man accustomed to the gruesome landscapes of crime scenes, felt a prickle of unease that went beyond the usual professional detachment. The crude, almost primeval symbols scrawled on the far wall, their dark pigment stark against the pale concrete, held his gaze. He ran a gloved finger along one of the lines, feeling the slightly raised texture of the dried substance. It wasn't paint, nor was it graffiti. It possessed an organic quality, a subtle hint of iron that sent a cold wave down his spine. His mind, trained to dissect and categorize, struggled to reconcile these ancient-looking markings with the urban decay surrounding them. They felt ritualistic, ominous, hinting at something far more disturbing than a simple act of vandalism. He pulled out a small, specialized camera from his kit, meticulously documenting each symbol, capturing their enigmatic forms from multiple angles, knowing that every detail, no matter how obscure, could eventually become a crucial piece of the puzzle. His attention then shifted to the solitary, dust-laden typewriter. It was an old Royal Standard, a workhorse of a machine, clearly dating back several decades. Its keys were stiff with disuse, some completely caked in a thick layer of grime. Ross, with the precision of a surgeon, used a small brush to gently clear away the dust, revealing faint, almost ghost-like impressions on the paper feed roller. He could discern the faint outline of a sheet of paper that had once been fed through, hinting at a message, a document, perhaps even a confession that had been typed here, in this very room, years ago. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He carefully bagged the typewriter, treating it as if it were a fragile artifact, its potential for yielding vital information far outweighing its seemingly mundane appearance. This was no mere abandoned object. It felt like a silent witness, holding untold narratives within its dormant mechanisms. Next, Ross turned his focus to the objects Arthur Jenkins had reported. The tarnished FBI badge, the worn leather briefcase, and the broken handcuffs. He laid them out on a clean, white sheet of evidence paper, his gaze lingering on the badge. The name Thomas Riley stared back at him, bold and unyielding. Ross remembered the whispers, the hushed conversations in the precinct corridors about Riley, a man whose disappearance had cast a long, dark shadow over the Chicago field office. Riley had been known for his relentless pursuit of corruption, his reputation as a lone wolf who wasn't afraid to step on powerful toes. The official explanation for his vanishing had been a mix of speculation and unsubstantiated theories, ultimately leading to the painful conclusion of presumed deceased. Yet here, in this desolate unit, were his personal effects, not lost, not discarded, but seemingly left behind in a struggle. The broken handcuffs, specifically, spoke volumes. They were standard FBI issue, designed to withstand immense force. Their shattered state indicated a violent confrontation, a desperate fight for survival. He then opened the worn leather briefcase. It was empty, save for a few stray fibers and a faint, almost metallic smell that Ross couldn't quite place. However, stitched into the interior lining, concealed within a cleverly designed false bottom, he discovered a thin, almost brittle, manila envelope. His heart quickened. This was the kind of detail that thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. The hidden compartment, the clandestine message. Inside, tucked away from prying eyes, were several pages of tightly written notes, a series of codes and acronyms that, at first glance, seemed incomprehensible. But then a familiar phrase jumped out at him, scrawled in capital letters at the top of one page. Operation Eagle. Ross's breath hitched. Operation Eagle. The name resonated deep within his memory, a ghost from the past, a hushed rumor he had heard years ago about a highly classified FBI investigation into deep-seated corruption within Chicago's City Hall and its police department. It was an operation so sensitive, so potentially explosive, that it had been kept under wraps, even from many within the Bureau itself. The mere mention of it conjured images of shadowy figures, political machinations, and the kind of power that could make people disappear without a trace. The notes, despite their coded language, began to paint a disturbing picture. There were dates, times, and cryptic references to the nest, the architect, and the syndicate. Locations were vaguely hinted at: old industrial park, abandoned warehouse district, the forgotten church. Each cryptic entry was a breadcrumb designed to be understood only by someone with the proper context, someone deeply embedded in the operation. Ross felt a growing sense of urgency. These weren't just notes. They were a lifeline, a desperate attempt by Agent Riley to leave behind a trail, a beacon in the darkness. The discovery of these documents, 5 years after Riley's disappearance, shattered the comforting, albeit painful assumption that he had simply vanished, or worse. It now suggested something far more sinister, far more deliberate. Riley hadn't just disappeared, he had been taken, and the answers to his fate lay hidden within these very pages, woven into the fabric of a massive, dangerous conspiracy. The realization sent a chill through Ross, not just from the cold of the storage unit, but from the cold, hard truth that was slowly beginning to crystallize before him. The initial call had been about a found badge. Now, it was clear he was standing at the threshold of something far larger, far more dangerous. The implications began to dawn on him with a terrifying clarity. Agent Riley had been on the verge of exposing something truly monumental, and someone had gone to extreme lengths to silence him. The game, for Michael Ross, had just changed. He carefully placed all the items into separate evidence bags, his mind racing, already piecing together the fragments of this long-dormant mystery. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the journey he was about to embark upon would lead him into the darkest corners of Chicago, forcing him to confront a truth far more unsettling than anything he had ever imagined. The case of Thomas Riley, once cold, was now burning with an intensity that threatened to consume everything in its path. The FBI field office in Chicago was a place of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the desolate silence of the storage unit. Michael Ross navigated the maze of cubicles and hushed conversations, the heavy manila envelope containing Agent Riley's notes clutched tightly in his hand. He had spent hours in the precinct's forensics lab, overseeing the careful examination of the typewriter and the meticulous processing of the unit itself. The lab technicians, initially intrigued by the age of the cold case, had grown increasingly puzzled by the enigmatic symbols and the unsettling aura of the findings. Their preliminary analysis of the dark pigment on the wall had yielded unsettling results. It contained traces of human blood, old and degraded, but undeniably human. This revelation only deepened the grim conviction that Riley's disappearance was far more sinister than anyone had dared to imagine, a conclusion that gnawed at Ross's professional detachment. Returning to his desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead seemed to amplify the weight of the new evidence. Ross spread out photocopies of Riley's coded notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The acronyms and cryptic phrases danced before his eyes, a frustrating puzzle resisting easy solutions. He knew he needed someone who spoke the language of the FBI's clandestine operations, someone who might have been privy to Riley's world before his abrupt vanishing. One name kept surfacing in the back of his mind: James "Jimmy" McKenzie. McKenzie had been Riley's partner for a time, a seasoned agent who had reportedly left the bureau shortly after Riley's disappearance, retreating from the world with a quiet bitterness. Rumors persisted that McKenzie knew more than he let on, that the abrupt end to his career was directly linked to the cold case that had haunted the bureau for years. Finding McKenzie's current whereabouts was surprisingly difficult. He had effectively vanished himself, burying his past beneath layers of anonymity. It took a few discreet calls to old contacts, favors owed and collected over 2 decades, to finally secure a lead, an obscure address in a quiet, almost forgotten suburb, miles away from the city's ceaseless clamor. The drive was long, the urban landscape gradually giving way to sleepy streets lined with modest, aging homes. McKenzie's house was unremarkable, a small 2-story structure with a perpetually overgrown lawn and faded paint. It exuded an air of solitude, almost as if the house itself was deliberately trying to disappear into the landscape. Ross knocked on the front door, the sound echoing hollowly in the stillness. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing a man who looked older, more weathered than the last time Ross had seen him in a blurred photograph from an old case file. Jimmy McKenzie's face was etched with lines of weariness. His eyes, once sharp and piercing, now held a deep-seated sadness that spoke of burdens carried for too long. He eyed Ross with a guarded suspicion, his posture stiff, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive gesture. "Detective Ross," McKenzie said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. "I figured someone would eventually come knocking about that old business." There was a resignation in his tone, as if he had been anticipating this visit for years. Ross explained his discovery at the storage unit, carefully detailing the badge, the briefcase, the broken handcuffs, and finally, the coded notes, referencing Operation Eagle. As Ross spoke, McKenzie's eyes, previously distant, sharpened, a flicker of an old fire briefly igniting within them. He remained silent for a long moment after Ross finished, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond Ross's shoulder, as if contemplating a distant memory. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken history. "Riley, he was onto something big," McKenzie finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with a bitterness that surprised Ross. Bigger than anyone wanted to admit. Corruption so deep it reached the very top of the food chain in this city. Cops, politicians, judges. They were all connected, a tangled web of greed and power. He paused, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Operation Eagle. That was Thomas's baby. He worked it off the books mostly. Trusted almost no one. Said he had to keep it from being compromised from within. McKenzie's words hung in the air, confirming Ross's worst suspicions. Riley hadn't been a victim of random violence. He had been targeted, silenced by powerful forces he was about to expose. McKenzie's reluctance was palpable, his fear almost tangible. He spoke in clipped sentences, carefully choosing his words, revealing just enough to confirm the dangerous nature of Riley's investigation, but holding back the deeper, more painful truths. Ross pressed him, asking about specific names, about the nature of the syndicate Riley had mentioned, but McKenzie shook his head slowly, a haunted look in his eyes. "I can't tell you everything, Detective. Not now. It's too dangerous. For both of us. Thomas, he paid the ultimate price for digging too deep." The old agent's eyes, filled with a mixture of grief and fear, darted nervously towards his windows as if expecting unseen eyes to be watching their conversation. "But I can tell you this," McKenzie continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Thomas was investigating a system of payoffs, kickbacks, and disappearances. The key to everything, he believed, was a series of safe houses or drops disguised as legitimate businesses, used to transfer information, money, and people. He was close to identifying the central hub, what he called the nest, a place where they held their secrets and their victims." McKenzie's words painted a chilling picture of a meticulously organized criminal enterprise, deeply embedded within the city's fabric, capable of making federal agents vanish without a trace, Ross felt a surge of grim determination. McKenzie's reluctance, his palpable fear, only served to underscore the monumental danger they were facing. The truth about Thomas Riley's fate was buried deep, and its revelation promised to shake the very foundations of Chicago. Ross knew, with a chilling certainty, that his path was now irrevocably intertwined with Riley's unfinished mission, and that the dangers lurking in the shadows were only just beginning to reveal themselves. The encounter with James McKenzie left Michael Ross with a profound sense of unease. McKenzie's haunted eyes and the palpable fear that clung to him like a shroud were more potent than any direct threat. It was the fear of a man who had seen too much, a man who understood the ruthless power of the entity Agent Riley had been investigating. Ross returned to the precinct that evening. The coded notes from Operation Eagle spread across his desk, their cryptic messages now infused with McKenzie's chilling revelations. The names and locations, once mere abstractions, began to take on a more sinister significance. The nest, the architect, the syndicate. These were no longer just code words. They were facets of a deeply entrenched, dangerous network. He worked late into the night, fueled by strong black coffee, his mind racing through possibilities, trying to connect the disparate pieces of the puzzle. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence, every silence a hidden whisper. The city, usually a source of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a labyrinth of unseen dangers, its bright lights merely a thin veneer over a festering darkness. The first warning came subtly, almost imperceptibly, the following morning. His secure line at the precinct, rarely used by anyone outside his trusted inner circle, rang with an unknown number. When he answered, a voice, gravelly and distorted, simply said, "Some things are better left buried, detective. For your own good." The line went dead. Ross felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. It wasn't a direct threat, but the implication was clear. Someone knew he was digging. Someone was watching. He tried to trace the call, but it was a dead end, a burner phone used once and discarded. This was a professional warning, a calculated move by those who sought to maintain their shadowy empire. Later that afternoon, as he left the precinct to grab a quick meal, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted, a faint glint of light reflecting off what might have been a camera lens. It was gone a moment later, blending seamlessly into the urban traffic, but the image lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that his actions had not gone unnoticed. The casual ease with which these warnings were delivered spoke volumes about the confidence and reach of the people he was now pursuing. They were not desperate criminals. They were organized, powerful, and utterly ruthless. The real violation, however, occurred that night. Ross returned to his small, meticulously kept apartment, a sanctuary from the often grim realities of his profession. The building was old, its security robust, and he had always felt a sense of unassailable privacy within its walls. Yet, the moment he unlocked his front door, a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible scent that wasn't his own, raised every alarm bell in his mind. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hand instinctively going for the concealed weapon at his hip. The apartment was not overtly ransacked. No drawers were pulled out, no furniture overturned. It was far more insidious than that. His desk, usually an organized expanse of papers and files, had been subtly disturbed. A specific stack of reports, those relating to old corruption cases that might intersect with Riley's investigation, had been slightly shifted, their corners no longer perfectly aligned. A framed photograph of his late wife, usually positioned precisely in the center of his mantelpiece, was now fractionally off-center. These were not the clumsy actions of a common burglar. This was a message, delivered with surgical precision, designed to instill fear and demonstrate absolute control. Someone had been in his apartment. Someone had deliberately entered his private space, not to steal, but to intimidate, to send a chilling reminder that no place was truly safe. Ross meticulously checked every corner, every cupboard, every hiding spot. Nothing was missing, but the chilling realization settled over him. They weren't interested in his possessions. They were interested in what he knew and what he was trying to uncover. The message was clear. They could get to him, even in his own home, without leaving a trace. The violation of his sanctuary felt deeply personal, a direct challenge to his resolve. It wasn't just about Thomas Riley anymore. It was about him, his safety, his pursuit of justice. The lines between his professional and personal life had blurred, dissolving into a dangerous continuum. He knew then, with a chilling certainty, that he had truly stumbled into something far larger and more perilous than he had initially conceived. The syndicate Riley had uncovered wasn't just powerful. It was omniscient, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the city, its eyes seemingly everywhere. He was no longer just investigating a cold case. He was now a direct participant, a target in a dangerous game where the stakes were life and death. The city's shadows, once merely a backdrop to his investigations, now seemed to press in on him, alive with unseen threats, confirming that he was indeed on the right track and that the path ahead would be fraught with unimaginable peril. His pursuit of the truth, once a matter of duty, had now become a fight for survival. The early morning hours found Michael Ross back at his desk, the fluorescent hum of the precinct office a constant drone in the oppressive silence that followed the violation of his home. Sleep had been an elusive, unwelcome visitor, chased away by the chilling certainty that his investigation into Thomas Riley's disappearance had transformed into something far more personal, far more dangerous. The image of his slightly shifted reports and the tilted photograph of his wife seared themselves into his mind, a stark reminder that the syndicate wasn't a faceless entity. It was a pervasive, intelligent threat capable of breaching his most intimate sanctuary. The anonymous warning call, the dark sedan, and now the subtle intrusion. Each element was a meticulously placed piece in a campaign of intimidation. But instead of deterring him, it only fueled a grim determination, solidifying his resolve to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He knew that the answers lay within the cryptic pages of Riley's notes, the only tangible link to the agent who had vanished into thin air 5 years prior. He spread the photocopies of Riley's notes across his desk, each page filled with a chaotic mosaic of dates, times, code names, and what appeared to be fragmented addresses. The symbols from the storage unit wall, now etched into his memory, seemed to echo the unsettling nature of the written clues. The task felt overwhelming, like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the instructions written in a dead language. He worked methodically, cross-referencing, highlighting and annotating, trying to find patterns in the seeming randomness. His mind, usually a finely tuned instrument of logic and deduction, felt strained, grappling with a system of communication designed to be impenetrable to outsiders. He focused on the recurring code words, the nest, the architect, and a string of numbers that appeared to be coordinates or partial street addresses. He felt a desperate urgency, a chilling premonition that time was a luxury he could not afford. The more he delved into Riley's frantic scribblings, the more he understood the immense pressure the agent must have been under, desperately trying to document his findings even as the walls closed in around him. Hours blurred into a relentless stream of caffeine and concentration. He utilized an old, barely used police database for obscure property records and abandoned buildings, a relic from a time before digital mapping made such manual searches obsolete. It was a painstaking process, but Ross had always found a strange comfort in the meticulous grind, the slow, deliberate unearthing of facts. He focused on the references to old industrial park and abandoned warehouse district, cross-referencing them with the fragmented numbers that seemed to hint at specific street blocks. His fingers, stained with ink from endless highlighting, traced lines on antiquated paper maps of Chicago, trying to overlay Riley's fragmented clues onto the city's grid. The breakthrough came not from a sudden flash of insight, but from sheer persistence. A sequence of numbers, repeated several times throughout the notes, combined with a particular set of symbols, finally clicked into place when cross-referenced with a section of the city's oldest industrial district, an area largely abandoned since the turn of the century. It was a block of dilapidated brick structures, mostly derelict factories and warehouses, slated for demolition but still standing, forgotten by the relentless march of urban development. One address in particular resonated with a chilling clarity. An old, defunct meatpacking plant, its name, Chicago Slaughterhouse Co. Faded, but still legible on a rusted sign hanging precariously above its crumbling entrance. Riley had repeatedly mentioned the processing plant and the chillers in his notes, alongside cryptic references to the Arch. The meatpacking plant, with its historical architecture and sprawling, interconnected buildings, fit the vague descriptions perfectly. It was a place where life was systematically ended, a grim irony that did not escape Ross as he considered its potential new purpose. Along with the address, nestled between 2 pages of numerical sequences, Ross found a small, creased black and white photograph. It was old, its edges softened by time and wear. The image depicted a group of men, dressed in formal attire, standing in front of a grand, classical building, its columns suggesting a government institution. The men were smiling, posing for the camera, but one face in particular seized Ross's attention. It was a younger James McKenzie, smiling openly, his arms slung around a man who exuded an aura of calm authority, a man whose face, despite the grainy quality of the photograph, was immediately recognizable as Thomas Riley. But what truly sent a jolt through Ross was the man standing directly behind Riley, partially obscured by shadow, his face a chilling mask of subtle power and concealed malice. This man, with his sharp, almost predatory eyes and a thin, unsettling smile, was a face Ross had seen before, not in old case files, but recently, in news reports and public appearances. Alderman Patrick Thorne, a seemingly respected rising star in Chicago politics, known for his philanthropic endeavors and his carefully cultivated image as a champion of the working class. The juxtaposition of the smiling faces, the seemingly innocent photograph, and the chilling implications of Riley's notes hit Ross with the force of a physical blow. The pieces were starting to align, forming a terrifying mosaic of corruption and betrayal that reached the highest echelons of the city. McKenzie's warning about the top of the food chain echoed in his mind, now with a face and a name: Alderman Thorne. The connection was too direct, too deliberate to be a mere coincidence. Ross felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. The meatpacking plant was more than just a lead. It was the nexus, the nest that Riley had sought, the heart of the syndicate's operations. The very idea of a prominent city official being involved in such depravity was nauseating, but the evidence, however fragmented, was building a compelling, terrifying case. Ross meticulously secured the photograph and the deciphered notes, his gaze returning to the old meatpacking plant's address. He knew he couldn't go to the plant alone. This was not a simple apprehension. This was an infiltration into the heart of a powerful, murderous organization. But he also knew he couldn't wait. The weight of Riley's unfinished mission, and the growing sense of dread about what he would find within those decaying walls, propelled him forward with a chilling, singular focus. The time for waiting, for deliberation, was over. The truth, however horrific, lay hidden within the walls of the Chicago Slaughterhouse Co., and Michael Ross was determined to unearth it, no matter what horrors awaited him there. The old Chicago Slaughterhouse Co. loomed under the bruised Chicago sky like a skeletal relic, a monument to a forgotten industrial past. Its massive brick walls, once vibrant with the bustle of commerce, now crumbled, scarred by decades of neglect and the relentless gnawing of urban decay. Broken windows stared out like vacant eyes, reflecting the grim gray light of the late afternoon. Michael Ross parked his unmarked sedan several blocks away, nestled discreetly amidst a row of discarded delivery trucks and overgrown weeds. The area was eerily quiet, the usual hum of city life replaced by the mournful whistle of the wind through rusted metal and the distant rhythmic clang of unseen machinery. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this place, so seemingly abandoned, held the key to Thomas Riley's fate, and perhaps the dark heart of the syndicate. He had carefully considered his approach. Calling for backup risked alarming the very people he sought to expose, given the high-level connections of Alderman Thorne. Relying on his own team meant potentially putting them in direct harm's way without adequate preparation. Or worse, if there was a mole within the department. The fear that McKenzie had shown, combined with the chilling intrusion into his own apartment, painted a stark picture of the syndicate's reach. Ross knew he had to confirm his suspicions, to find definitive proof before unleashing the full force of law enforcement. This was a reconnaissance mission, a solitary journey into the heart of a suspected conspiracy, where his only companions were his training, his instincts, and the ghost of Agent Riley. He checked his sidearm, its weight a familiar comfort, and secured a compact tactical flashlight to his belt. His movements were fluid, practiced, honed by years of navigating dangerous urban landscapes. Approaching the plant, the air grew heavy with the faint, lingering smell of old blood and a sickly sweet metallic odor that Ross couldn't immediately identify. It was a smell that instinctively made his stomach churn, a primal warning of something deeply unnatural. He circumvented the main gates, rusted shut and overgrown, finding a weak point in the perimeter fence, a section where the wire had been cut years ago and never repaired. Slipping through, he found himself in a vast, overgrown courtyard, strewn with derelict machinery and shattered glass. The wind, funneling through the labyrinthine structures, created an eerie symphony of groans and creaks, making the old plant feel alive, breathing with a sinister purpose. He chose a less obvious entry point, a broken loading dock door on the side of the building, its splintered wood offering easy access. The moment he stepped inside, the temperature dropped precipitously, and the world outside vanished, replaced by an oppressive, cavernous darkness. His flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom, revealing vast, empty spaces, stretching into an inky blackness. The air was thick with dust, heavy with the stench he had noted outside, now more pronounced, clinging to the damp concrete and rusting metal. This was not the typical smell of abandonment. It was something sharper, more chemical, mingling disturbingly with the lingering scent of slaughter. Ross moved slowly, methodically, his senses heightened, every creak and rustle amplifying in the profound silence. He navigated through a maze of disused machinery, towering vats, and rusted conveyor belts, their forms looming like grotesque metallic monsters in the shifting beam of his light. The floor was slick in places, with a viscous residue that he carefully avoided. He was in the main processing area, where once countless animals met their end. Now, it felt like a tomb, but one that held recent, terrible memories. He noticed subtle details, faint, circular indentations on the concrete floor that suggested heavy objects had been moved recently, drag marks that led into the darker recesses of the plant, and a series of newly installed, heavy-duty electrical conduits that snaked across the ceiling, leading towards a more isolated section of the complex. These were not the signs of an abandoned building. They were the telltale marks of clandestine activity. His gaze caught something disturbing. On one of the immense cold storage doors, a faded, almost invisible smear. He brought his light closer, his heart thudding in his chest. It was a dark, dried substance, consistent with blood. But it wasn't the aged, almost black residue of a slaughterhouse. It was a newer stain, a deep, unsettling maroon. It seemed fresh, despite the years since the plant had officially closed. Following the path of the new electrical conduits, Ross found himself in a narrower, more secluded corridor, leading away from the main processing floor. The walls here were strangely clean, free from the accumulated grime of decades, as if they had been recently scrubbed. The air grew colder, and the strange, sickly sweet scent intensified, tinged now with something else, a faint, almost clinical odor of disinfectant, fighting a losing battle against a deeper, more pungent smell of decay. He reached a heavy, reinforced steel door, unlike any other in the plant. It had a modern electronic lock, gleaming incongruously amidst the surrounding rust. This was not part of the original structure. This was the secret room McKenzie had spoken of, the potential nest that Riley had sought. Ross knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that whatever horrors awaited him lay behind this door. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out, touching the cold, unyielding metal, sensing the profound evil that radiated from within. The knowledge that he was just moments away from the truth about Agent Riley, and perhaps countless others, filled him with a potent mixture of dread and grim resolve. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of his own heart, echoing in the vast, decaying silence of the abandoned slaughterhouse. The reinforced steel door stood as a silent, formidable barrier, its modern electronic lock an anomaly in the decrepit landscape of the old meatpacking plant. Michael Ross's flashlight beam danced over its cold surface, illuminating the subtle gleam of its sophisticated mechanism. The air around it was heavy with that same sickeningly sweet metallic scent, now infused with a sharper chemical tang, like antiseptic failing to mask something far more putrid. His instincts screamed at him to call for backup, to wait for a full tactical unit. But the chilling thought of Alderman Thorne's probable involvement, combined with the personal threats he had received, made him hesitate. Every moment counted. The lives of potential victims, perhaps even the lingering hope for Thomas Riley, depended on his next move. He knew he was walking into a trap, or, at the very least, a profoundly dangerous situation. But the weight of Riley's 5-year absence, and the grim knowledge of what the agent had been investigating, pushed him forward. He carefully examined the lock, searching for any vulnerabilities, any sign of a keypad or biometric scanner. There was none. It was a sophisticated, keyless entry system, likely controlled remotely. This implied a level of organization and technological capability far beyond what he had initially assumed for a local corruption ring. The syndicate wasn't just powerful. It was technologically advanced, capable of operating with extreme discretion. He ran his gloved hand along the seam of the door, feeling the cold steel, searching for any give. It was hermetically sealed, built to contain whatever lay within. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, straining to hear any sound from beyond. Nothing. Only the hollow echoes of the vast, abandoned plant and the frantic pounding of his own heart. Ross moved his flashlight beam along the floor near the door, searching for any other entry point, any subtle flaw in the construction. His gaze caught on a faint, almost invisible seam in the concrete floor, running parallel to the wall, partially obscured by a thin layer of dust and grime. It was too precise to be a crack from age or structural weakness. He knelt, scraping away the dust with his gloved finger, revealing a thin, almost hairline gap in the concrete. Beneath it, he felt a faint ridge, a hidden door. This was it. This was the secret room McKenzie had spoken of, the clandestine hub that Riley had desperately tried to locate. It wasn't through the fortified steel door. It was beneath his very feet. He began to search the surrounding area more meticulously, his beam sweeping over every inch of the wall and floor. His fingers explored rough patches, loose bricks, anything that might serve as a lever or a hidden release. He remembered Riley's notes, the references to hidden mechanisms and the old ways. He thought about the original purpose of the plant, its various levels, its complex network of pipes and ventilation shafts. His eyes fixed on the section of the wall near the hidden floor seam, where a large, rusted pipe disappeared into the concrete. Running his hand along the pipe, he felt a barely perceptible give in the metal, a slight looseness at its base, unlike the other pipes. He grasped it firmly and twisted. With a low, grinding groan, a section of the concrete floor, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, slowly began to lower, revealing a dark, yawning abyss beneath. A wave of cold, stagnant air, heavy with that pervasive, cloying scent, wafted up from the newly revealed opening. Ross shone his flashlight down into the darkness. A set of crudely constructed metal stairs, their treads caked with what looked like dried mud, and something darker, descended into the blackness. The air felt thick, oppressive, a palpable sense of dread settling over him. He could hear a faint, irregular drip of water echoing from the unseen depths below. The smell grew stronger, a nauseating cocktail of decay, chemicals, and something undeniably organic and putrid. He gripped his flashlight tighter, its beam a fragile lifeline against the overwhelming darkness. Carefully, Ross began his descent. Each step on the metal stairs produced a low groan, a metallic shriek that echoed unsettlingly in the confined space. The walls of the stairwell were damp, slick with condensation, and as he moved deeper, the air grew colder still, heavy with a pervasive, bone-chilling dampness. The beam of his flashlight revealed a small, claustrophobic chamber at the bottom of the stairs, carved out of the earth itself, reinforced with concrete. It was not a natural cavern. It was clearly man-made, a deliberate excavation designed for concealment. The air in this subterranean space was thick with the foul, unmistakable odor of decomposition, a smell so potent it made his eyes water and his stomach clench. His flashlight swept across the damp concrete walls, revealing an alarming sight. The walls were covered in a series of crude, desperate scratch marks, some shallow, others deep, as if made by fingernails clawing against the unyielding surface. There were also etched symbols, similar to those found in the storage unit. But here, they were intertwined with what appeared to be frantic tally marks, counting down days, or perhaps lives. And then, his light landed on a single grim discovery that stopped his breath in his throat. Chained to the far wall, their form barely discernible through the thick layer of dust and cobwebs, were a pair of rusted heavy shackles designed to bind a human being. They hung silently, a chilling testament to the chamber's horrifying purpose. Nearby, barely visible in the shifting light etched into the damp concrete floor, were a series of faint, almost erased words. They tried to break me. Thomas R. The name, scrawled with desperate urgency, was unmistakably Riley's. It was a whisper from the past, a harrowing message from a man who had faced unimaginable torment within these very walls. Michael Ross stood frozen, the full, crushing weight of the truth finally descending upon him. Thomas Riley had been here, in this horrifying place, trapped, tortured, and ultimately silenced. The chilling reality of Riley's final moments and the profound evil that had orchestrated them now materialized before his eyes. A tangible and terrifying presence in the silent, suffocating darkness. The case of Agent Thomas Riley was no longer a cold file. It was a living nightmare, and he was standing in its very heart. The profound silence of the hidden subterranean chamber was shattered only by the frantic drumming of Michael Ross's own heart, echoing in the suffocating darkness. The faint, desperate etching of Thomas Riley's name on the damp concrete wall. They tried to break me. Thomas R. was a ghost of a whisper from a past too horrifying to comprehend. The rusted shackles, hanging like macabre ornaments, cemented the grim reality that this was no mere hideout for criminals. It was a torture chamber, a place where hope was systematically extinguished. The stench of decay, now overpowering, made him gag, but he forced himself to push past the visceral revulsion, driven by a cold, righteous fury. He had come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. The truth about Riley, and perhaps countless others, lay buried in this unholy place. He swept his flashlight beam frantically across the small chamber, his eyes searching for any other sign, any further clue. The walls, damp and cold, seemed to press in on him, the crude scratch marks and frantic tally lines taking on a new, horrifying significance, each one a testament to the agony endured within these confines. He noticed a slight protrusion in the floor, partially hidden beneath a layer of solidified grime and dust near the base of the shackles. It was a metal plate, about 2 feet by 2 feet, secured by heavy bolts. The precise, almost sterile nature of its installation, so out of place in the otherwise crude chamber, screamed of deliberate concealment. This was not part of the original structure. It was an addition, a carefully constructed secret within a secret. Ross knew with a chilling certainty that whatever lay beneath that plate was the ultimate answer, the grim culmination of his search. He searched the perimeter of the chamber for a tool, anything that could help him pry open the plate. His eyes landed on a heavy, rusted crowbar leaning against a corner, almost swallowed by the shadows. It felt cold and rough in his gloved hands, its weight surprisingly substantial. With a deep breath, he inserted the end of the crowbar into the narrow gap beneath the metal plate and, with a grunt of exertion, began to apply leverage. The bolts, long rusted into place, resisted at first, but with a series of agonizing groans and sharp cracks, they slowly began to yield. The metallic shriek of scraping metal echoed deafeningly in the small space as the plate slowly agonizingly lifted. Beneath the plate was a shallow cavity, roughly 3 feet deep, excavated from the earth. As the last of the dust and debris settled, Ross shone his flashlight into the newly revealed void, and a gasp, a sound of profound shock and horror, escaped his lips. Lying in the compacted earth, partially covered by a thin layer of fine soil and decay, were skeletal remains. They were human, undeniably so, their bones pale and brittle, stripped bare by time and the elements. A skull, its eye sockets empty and hollow, stared blankly upwards. A faint, almost ethereal scent of ancient dust and a deep, lingering decay filled his nostrils. He knelt, his knees hitting the cold concrete, his mind reeling from the brutal finality of the discovery. This was it. This was the true answer to the 5-year mystery. He meticulously examined the remains, his professional training kicking in, overriding the immediate wave of revulsion and grief. The skeleton was relatively small, indicating a slight build. His eyes fell upon a faint, almost disintegrated patch of fabric clinging to the hip bone, the remnants of what appeared to be a skirt. And then he saw it, partially obscured by the collarbone. A small silver chain with a tarnished circular pendant, a delicate engraving still faintly visible, the letter S, Sarah O'Connor. The name echoed in his mind, a ghostly whisper from the past, confirming the identity of the remains. Agent Sarah O'Connor, who had vanished in 1989, her fate now tragically and horrifyingly revealed in this desolate, forgotten chamber. Near the skeletal remains, tucked carefully into a small, almost undetectable recess in the dirt, was a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover warped and brittle with age and dampness. It was surprisingly intact, protected from the worst of the elements by its clever concealment. Ross gently, almost reverently, lifted it out. The leather flaked away at his touch, revealing brittle, yellowed pages within. He carefully opened the notebook, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The handwriting, though faint and often shaky, was unmistakably feminine and filled with a desperate, chilling narrative. It was Sarah O'Connor's journal, her silent testament, detailing the last agonizing days of her life. The first entries were coherent, detailed accounts of her investigation, confirming McKenzie's earlier statements about a vast corruption network implicating high-ranking city officials and police officers. She named names, documented dates, and described meetings in cryptic, yet understandable terms. She had been on the verge of exposing Alderman Patrick Thorne, his role as the architect of the syndicate, his involvement in illicit financial dealings and far more sinister activities. The entries then grew more frantic, the handwriting more desperate, detailing her capture, her transfer to the meatpacking plant, and the relentless psychological torment inflicted upon her. She described the interrogations, the attempts to extract information, the chilling calm of her captors, their utter lack of humanity. She wrote of the oppressive darkness, the cold, the constant presence of the sickening scent that still permeated the chamber. The final entries were scrawled, almost illegible, a testament to her fading strength. She wrote of knowing her end was near, but also of her unyielding refusal to break, to betray the integrity of her mission. She wrote of her determination to leave behind a record, a truth that would one day be found, a testament to the evil she had uncovered. And then, on the very last page, a single, clear message, scrawled with what must have been her final reserves of strength. They silenced me. Don't let them silence the truth. Find the others. The harvest continues. The words resonated with a terrifying clarity, a chilling legacy from a courageous agent. Ross stood there, the notebook clutched in his hand, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the stark, horrifying reality of Sarah O'Connor's final resting place. The sheer depravity of what had transpired here, the cold, calculated cruelty of the syndicate, washed over him, a wave of profound sorrow and righteous anger. His personal feelings aside, this was the definitive proof he needed. The skeletal remains, the shackles, and now this chilling notebook. The evidence was irrefutable. But Sarah's final words, "Find the others. The harvest continues," sent a fresh wave of terror through him. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, ongoing atrocity. The syndicate's operations extended far beyond the silencing of one determined FBI agent. Michael Ross had found the truth, but the truth was far more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. The real nightmare, he knew, was only just beginning. The brutal truth discovered within the hidden chamber of the old meatpacking plant solidified Michael Ross's resolve, sharpening his focus with a cold, unwavering clarity. The skeletal remains of Sarah O'Connor, the rusted shackles, and, most damning of all, her final, desperate journal entries were irrefutable proof of a monstrous crime that had festered in the city's dark corners for 5 agonizing years. Her final plea, "Find the others. The harvest continues," haunted him, a chilling testament to the scale of the syndicate's depravity. The weight of her sacrifice and the unspoken suffering of potentially countless others pressed down on him, urging him to act with swift, decisive precision. This was no longer a cold case. It was a living, breathing horror, and he was now holding the key to its exposure. He ascended the crude metal stairs, his steps heavy with the grim knowledge he now carried, the putrid smell of the chamber clinging to his clothes and skin. Emerging into the upper reaches of the abandoned plant, the outside world, with its familiar sounds of distant traffic and the distant glow of city lights, felt jarringly distant, almost surreal. He made his way back to his parked sedan, the notebook carefully secured in an evidence bag alongside the chilling photograph of Alderman Thorne. The drive back to the precinct was a blur, his mind a whirlwind of tactical considerations and the immense implications of what he had uncovered. He bypassed his own desk, heading directly for the secure, heavily guarded offices of the FBI Field Command and the District Attorney's Special Investigations Unit. This was not a matter for the local police. This was a federal case, a conspiracy reaching into the highest echelons of power. The initial reception was a mix of skepticism and cautious intrigue. A lone detective from the Chicago Police Department claiming to have solved the 5-year-old disappearance of an FBI agent, implicating a prominent city official, sounded like the plot of a sensationalist novel. But Michael Ross was not known for flights of fancy. His reputation for meticulousness and an unwavering commitment to facts preceded him. He laid out the evidence methodically, his voice devoid of emotion, allowing the stark horror of his findings to speak for themselves. He presented the authenticated FBI badge of Thomas Riley, the broken handcuffs, the forensic report confirming human blood on the storage unit wall. Then, with a chilling solemnity, he revealed the skeletal remains, offering preliminary evidence that they belonged to Agent Sarah O'Connor, and finally, he produced the centerpiece, Sarah's journal. As he narrated the story, reading excerpts from Sarah's desperate entries, her detailed account of the syndicate, the code names, the locations, and her chilling description of Alderman Patrick Thorne as the architect, the room fell silent. The FBI agents, initially guarded, leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to grim fascination, then to a palpable sense of shock and outrage. The assistant district attorney, a hardened prosecutor known for her unflappable demeanor, visibly blanched as Ross read Sarah's final defiant words. "They silenced me. Don't let them silence the truth. Find the others. The harvest continues." The evidence, raw and undeniable, painted a horrific picture of an organized, deeply entrenched criminal enterprise involved not only in financial corruption, but also in unspeakable acts of abduction, torture, and murder. The confirmation that Thomas Riley had been investigating the very same syndicate, his notes corroborating Sarah's journal, galvanized the room. Within hours, the wheels of justice began to grind with a terrifying efficiency. A joint task force was immediately established, comprising elements from the FBI's Special Investigations Unit, the District Attorney's Office, and a select, vetted group of homicide detectives, including Michael Ross. The old meatpacking plant was sealed off, transformed into a massive crime scene, its secrets meticulously excavated by forensic teams. The discovery of Sarah O'Connor's remains was just the beginning. Utilizing the detailed information from her journal and Riley's coded notes, the task force launched a series of coordinated raids across the city. Hidden documents, financial records, and damning correspondences were unearthed from various properties linked to Thorne and his associates. The scope of the syndicate was far larger than anyone had dared to imagine, its tendrils reaching into city contracts, real estate development, and even the illicit trafficking of vulnerable individuals. The arrests began quietly at first, targeting lower-level operatives and financial facilitators, but as the evidence mounted, the net widened, closing in on the higher echelons. The biggest fish, Alderman Patrick Thorne, was apprehended at his sprawling suburban estate, taken into custody in a pre-dawn raid that shocked the city. The news, when it finally broke, sent shockwaves through Chicago and across the nation. A respected public figure, a philanthropic champion, revealed to be the mastermind behind a horrific network of corruption and murder. The public outrage was immediate and intense, a visceral reaction to the betrayal of trust and the unspeakable nature of the crimes. For Michael Ross, watching the news reports, a grim satisfaction settled over him. He had fulfilled his promise to Sarah O'Connor, to Thomas Riley. He had found the truth, and justice, however delayed, was finally being served. Yet, even as the arrests mounted, a chilling thought lingered in his mind, echoing Sarah's final plea. The harvest continues. He knew that while the architect had been captured, the full scope of the syndicate's operations, its network of victims and collaborators, might extend far beyond the borders of Chicago, suggesting that the unraveling web of darkness was only just beginning to truly reveal its horrifying scale. The fight for true justice, he realized, was far from over. The arrest of Alderman Patrick Thorne, a figure once lauded as a pillar of the community, sent seismic waves through the city of Chicago, and indeed across the entire nation. News channels broadcast relentless coverage, their headlines screaming betrayal and horror. The public, initially disbelieving, watched in grim fascination as the details of the syndicate's monstrous operations slowly unfurled, revealing a network of corruption, human trafficking, and unspeakable violence hidden beneath the veneer of civic respectability. Michael Ross, now a central figure in the unprecedented investigation, found himself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. He attended press conferences, his face stoic and resolute, answering questions with a calm professionalism that belied the inner turmoil he felt. He presented the irrefutable evidence, The meticulously preserved journal of Sarah O'Connor, her desperate words now read aloud in courtrooms and echoed across airwaves, confirming the chilling accounts of her last days and the true nature of the harvest. The emotional impact on the city was profound. There was outrage, grief, and a collective sense of violation. Trust in institutions, already fragile, was further eroded as the names of other high-ranking officials, police chiefs, and even a prominent judge emerged from the depths of Sarah's and Thomas Riley's notes, leading to further arrests and resignations. The sheer scale of the conspiracy was staggering, stretching back decades, preying on the vulnerable and exploiting the city's power structures for unspeakable gain. For the first time in 5 years, the public received a full, unvarnished account of what had truly happened to Agent Thomas Riley. The discovery of his personal effects in the storage unit, the coded notes, and his desperate fight against the syndicate were detailed in chilling clarity. The fact that he had been so close, that his sacrifice was not in vain, brought a bittersweet solace to his grieving family and former colleagues. But it was the story of Agent Sarah O'Connor that truly resonated, becoming a tragic symbol of courage and an enduring testament to the human spirit's capacity for resistance even in the face of unimaginable terror. Her journal, a harrowing chronicle of her final days, was presented as key evidence in the grand jury proceedings against Thorne and his co-conspirators. The image of her skeletal remains, found chained in that cold, forgotten cellar, became a stark, unforgettable reminder of the depths of human depravity and the ultimate price she had paid for seeking the truth. Her unflinching determination to document the syndicate's crimes, to leave behind a legacy of truth even as she faced her own demise, cemented her place as a hero. In a poignant and solemn ceremony held at the Chicago FBI field office, a special commendation was posthumously awarded to Agent Sarah O'Connor for her extraordinary bravery, unwavering dedication, and ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. Her name, which had been reduced to a cold case file, was now spoken with reverence and profound respect. Her family, still bearing the quiet grief of years of uncertainty, accepted the award with tearful gratitude, their long-held questions finally answered, their daughter's honor finally restored. Michael Ross stood among the attendees, his gaze fixed on the plaque bearing Sarah's name, a silent promise echoing in his heart that her sacrifice would not be forgotten. The heavy burden of the case, which had weighed on him for months, began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had honored his duty. He had honored the memory of 2 fallen agents, and he had helped bring a monstrous evil into the light. The legal proceedings that followed were protracted and emotionally draining, but the overwhelming evidence, meticulously gathered and presented, led to swift convictions. Alderman Patrick Thorne, once a man of influence and power, was stripped of his titles and his carefully constructed facade, exposed as a ruthless, calculating architect of suffering. He and his inner circle were sentenced to life imprisonment. Their reign of terror finally brought to a definitive end. The impact of the investigation extended far beyond the arrests. It initiated a massive overhaul of several city departments, uncovering systemic corruption and leading to the implementation of new oversight measures designed to prevent such a dark conspiracy from ever taking root again. The public, though deeply scarred by the revelations, found a renewed sense of purpose, a collective commitment to vigilance and accountability. For Michael Ross, the conclusion of the major arrests brought a sense of quiet exhaustion. The nightmares which had plagued him since his discovery in the meatpacking plant slowly began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He had faced down an unimaginable evil, looked into its abyss, and emerged, not unscathed, but with his core belief in justice reaffirmed. The city of Chicago, forever changed by the revelations, began the long process of healing, confronting its hidden wounds and striving for a future where transparency and integrity would prevail. The story of Sarah O'Connor and Thomas Riley, once shrouded in mystery and despair, was now a powerful narrative of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of truth. A stark reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the light of justice, when relentlessly sought, would ultimately prevail. But even amidst the triumphs, a subtle current of unease persisted. Sarah's final words, "The harvest continues," lingered in Ross's mind, a quiet, unsettling whisper that suggested the syndicate, though crippled, might have deeper roots, hidden connections that extended far beyond the borders of Chicago, perhaps even across state lines. The dismantling of Thorne's network was a monumental victory, but the chilling possibility remained that other, similar nests might still exist, operating in the shadows, waiting for their moment to resurface. The battle against such pervasive evil, Ross knew, was an ongoing vigilance, a fight that stretched far beyond any single city or any single case. The crisp Chicago wind, once a harbinger of chilling discoveries, now carried a different tune for Michael Ross. The trials of Patrick Thorne and his network had concluded, the resounding guilty verdicts a testament to the meticulous work of the Joint Task Force. The headlines had faded. The immediate public outrage had settled into a simmering resentment, and the city, though irrevocably scarred by the revelations, was slowly beginning to heal. Yet for Ross, the echoes of the abandoned meatpacking plant, the lingering scent of decay, and the desperate scrawl of Sarah O'Connor's journal remained etched in his memory, a permanent fixture in the landscape of his mind. He had played his part, brought the monsters to justice, and honored the sacrifice of those who had fallen. But the victory, he knew, was tinged with a profound sadness, a stark reminder of the darkness that lay beneath the surface of civilization. He found himself often revisiting the old warehouse district, not to search for new clues, but to simply stand in the quiet solitude of the area where so much had been uncovered. The meatpacking plant, now fully dismantled by demolition crews, was a gaping wound in the earth, soon to be filled, erased from the city's physical map. But it would never be erased from his. He remembered the feeling of dread as he first stepped into Unit Number 7, the unsettling symbols on the wall, the silent typewriter. He recalled the strained conversation with James McKenzie, the former agent's haunted eyes a silent warning of the dangers Ross was stepping into, the threats, the violation of his apartment. All those attempts to deter him now seemed distant, almost unreal, dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of the evil he had exposed. He had stared into the abyss, and while it had not consumed him, it had undeniably changed him, leaving him with a deeper understanding of human cruelty and resilience. The formal commendations and quiet praise from his superiors felt hollow in comparison to the weight of the lives lost and the suffering endured. He had received a promotion, a quiet acknowledgement of his extraordinary work, but the true reward lay in the knowledge that Sarah O'Connor's voice had finally been heard, that Thomas Riley's sacrifice had not been in vain. Their names, once whispered in hushed tones of unsolved mystery, were now spoken with reverence, their dedication etched into the annals of law enforcement history. Ross often thought of Sarah's final words in her journal. "They silenced me. Don't let them silence the truth. Find the others. The harvest continues." The harvest, that chilling term, suggested a systematic operation far grander than Thorne's local network. While Thorne and his inner circle were behind bars, the possibility of other architects, other nests, operating in different cities, perhaps even on an international scale, gnawed at him. The sheer sophistication of the syndicate's methods, their ability to remain hidden for so long, hinted at a deeper, more pervasive organization that extended beyond the reach of a single city's law enforcement. He knew his role in this particular case was complete. The Chicago syndicate had been dismantled, its leadership incarcerated. The city was slowly rebuilding its trust, its institutions undergoing a necessary cleansing. But Michael Ross was a detective, driven by an unwavering commitment to justice, and the lingering questions from Sarah's journal continued to echo in his mind, a quiet challenge. He understood that evil, particularly one as organized and methodical as the syndicate, was rarely a singular entity. It adapted, evolved, and sought new ground. The victory in Chicago was profound, a testament to the dedication of those who fought against the shadows. But it was not the end of the war. It was merely a battle won. In the quiet solitude of his apartment, the photograph of his late wife, now perfectly aligned on the mantelpiece, offered a quiet comfort. He had protected his sanctuary, but more importantly, he had brought light into the darkest corners of his city. He still worked cases, his days filled with the familiar rhythms of police work, but there was a subtle shift in his approach. He looked deeper, questioned more, always aware of the unseen layers of deceit that could hide beneath the mundane. He had become a quieter, more reflective man, burdened by the truths he had uncovered, yet fortified by the resilience he had witnessed. The story of Sarah O'Connor and Thomas Riley, a story of courage, betrayal, and ultimate justice, became a legend whispered among a new generation of agents. It served as a grim reminder of the vigilance required to protect the innocent and the profound sacrifices demanded of those who stood against the tide of darkness. For Michael Ross, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but his perspective was forever altered. He remained on the front lines, a sentinel against the unseen threats, always listening for the faint, unsettling whispers that might indicate the harvest had indeed continued, somewhere else, in another unsuspecting city, waiting for another vigilant soul to shine a light into its abyss. The fight was endless, but so too, he now knew, was the capacity for courage and the unwavering, determined pursuit of truth